I'll always go, check out Wuxtree Records and the 40 Watt. And usually when I meet friends there, we will meet at the grill.
This is Tony Waller, and you are listening to episode 226 of the Waitin Since Last Saturday podcast. Today I'm joined by Tommy Tomlinson for a Spotlight Series podcast. Tommy currently works at WFAE, Charlotte's NPR affiliate, where he's the host of the fantastic Southbound Podcast. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning finalist, a Neiman Fellow in journalism, and author of The Elephant in the Room, which we have the opportunity to talk about at length. He's a UGA grad and has fond memories of his time here in Athens, which we get to talk about some old school stuff. Don't want to hold you back from that. Thank you for listening. Welcome, everybody. This is Tony Waller with the Waitin Since Last Saturday podcast, a special signature series here. And I am very honored to have eventual University of Georgia graduate, which we'll talk about, Tommy Tomlinson. Tommy, thank you very much for taking the time to be here.
Oh, my pleasure, Tony. Thanks for having me, man.
I guess for posterity's sake, we're recording this on March 18th, and from the time we set this up about a week ago till today, things have changed. How are you and your wife, Alex, right?
Alex, yeah.
Alex, I apologize. How are y'all handling this? I mean, both of you, I assume both of you generally work from home as it is.
Well, actually, I don't. I have a day job at WFAE, which is the NPR station here in Charlotte, where we live, and I am often at the office. But as of last Friday, I think, they've asked us to work from home unless it's absolutely necessary. So I've been home since then. I've got recording gear set up here. In fact, I've recorded a commentary in my bathroom the other day, which is like the best. It's usually the best sound in the house. It's if you ever have to record something, record it in your bathroom. And so we're here. Charlotte's still a place where you can go out, and people have gone out. In my neighborhood is very walkable, and there are people walking around and stuff, and everybody's keeping their distance. And so my wife and I are here. Her mother is living with us temporarily. She fell a few weeks ago and had an injury, and so she's staying with us while she heals up. And so the three of us are managing, and so far everything's been pretty fun. It's weird, obviously, but so far everything's been okay.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. It's essentially, what neighborhood in Charlotte do you live in?
It's called Plaza Midwood. It's just east of uptown Charlotte. We call it uptown here instead of downtown. So it's a couple of miles from the skyscrapers and stuff. It's an old neighborhood that dates back to the turn of the 20th century. And lots of people out walking around usually every day. And so far they've managed to keep doing that.
Oh, that's awesome. We were talking about Will Leach, who you worked with at Sports on Earth. He has a kind of a daily newsletter, and he's talking about him getting out and running, and just how often, or maybe it was his weekly newsletter, talking about him running up Millage, and he's the Millage runner guy. It's something I've noticed interesting. I live out in South Oconee County, in the county, and I've noticed people out walking a lot more than I have in the past, and so maybe we'll get healthier. I don't know.
Well, I do think people are going to increasingly get stir crazy if they can't go out and do their normal things, and so I think getting out and getting some fresh air, however you can do it, is probably an important part of all this.
Yeah. So, just to catch me up, when were you at Georgia?
I was there from 82 to 86. My freshman year was Herschel's last year at Georgia. And so they went 11-0 and played for the national championship against Penn State. And then that spring, the basketball team went to the Final Four for the only time in Georgia history. And so I thought it was always going to be like that from then on. And it turned out not to be true.
Yeah, that's a fantastic time. I mean, you and I had a chance. We overlapped. If I recall, you left here in December of '86. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, you and I overlapped one quarter. I guess I started in fall of '86, and it's interesting. And we'll talk about the elephant in the room in a minute. But it was like one of those things. Every time I read about something you went to or something you did in Athens, like, man. At Classic City Sub Shop. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. I was like, that was right beside Papa Joe's, right? And so I've had a lot of interesting discussions with people talking about your book, talking about the old school places on Baxter, because I too am a refugee of Russell Hall, and having spent freshman year, I think everybody was a freshman felt like. So, what was your favorite UJ student memory between your time at the Red and Black and getting to see Herschel play and getting to see that '83 basketball team play?
I was thinking of, when you mentioned Russell Hall, so I think the one mark that we left on campus was, between Russell and Brumby, there's that basketball court. And when I was there, we had my friend John Bauer worked for Domino's. And so he would work late at night, and he would come back with like the pizzas that didn't sell because somebody didn't pay for it or they messed up the order or whatever it was. And he would come back at like midnight, 1 a.m. sometimes, with all these leftover pizzas. And he'd come and bang on our doors and wake us up. And there was a group of about 8 or 10 of us who were friends. And we would go out on the Russell slab and play basketball then, in the middle of the night, and then eat Domino's and then go back to bed. Well, the students who were actually studying, were ticked off because they heard us out yelling around and bouncing the ball, at 12 or 1 a.m. And people got furious with us. In fact, one night somebody shot bottle rockets at us from their window at us along the basketball court. And so anyway, after we all left Russell and dispersed, we went back there one day, and they had sprayed like in stencil on the basketball courts, like no games after midnight or something. And I thought that was our legacy, that we left there, that we were the ones who forced them to say, you can't play basketball all night at Russell, because that's what we used to do.
That's fantastic. I remember seeing that on those courts because I had a group of friends. We played tennis, and they had just finally put lights on those tennis courts on the backside of the parking lot. And
right.
I can remember a lot of nights going over there and playing until, at time I thought was late. You're 18-year-old from South Georgia, and you stay, I had to go to bed until midnight if I didn't want to. And I had a similar thing. I had a good friend that worked at the Black Forest Bakery over in Normaltown, and we'd always wait for her to show up with the leftover donuts, and the same thing. We'd go and hang out.
Oh man, that's even better.
Oh well, I don't know. Domino's was a big deal then. But it's funny that that you talk about that because that kind of we talked about before we got on the whole idea of memories revolving around food. In a lot of ways, your book, The Elephant in the Room, it feels like it is you grappling with how that has not only affected your life, but just the important place it plays in your life.
Oh, sure. A lot of my, most, I guess, the memories that are most meaningful to me, in a good way and a bad way, most of those revolve around food in one way or another. Like that, hanging out with my buddies and having Domino's late at night and going to the games. And of course, you go to the games or you tailgate and you have this good food and you drink, Jim Beam and Cokes and stop back at like McDonald's or Crystal on the way back to the apartment or the dorm and get food, to take you through the rest of the day. I used to, when we all lived in a house together my senior year, and we would buy pizzas on Saturday, and I'd wake up Sunday morning or actually Sunday afternoon, just in time for the NFL games to start. And I'd pull out cold pizza and leftover beer out of the fridge, and those are moments that I kind of look back on fondly. But then again, at the same time, as I was sad or lonely or depressed and I went through all those things, at Georgia, that I would eat to make myself feel better in those moments too. And so, yeah, it's all these memories sort of revolve around food in one way or another.
So the concept of the book is, it's fantastic and it is super well done. It's such a compelling story, but it's also personal in a way that sometimes, my personal preference is not to read a book that makes me feel voyeuristic. And you do such a good job of opening yourself up. How did you get to write this book?
Well, first of all, I was scared to do it for a long time. Once we kind of came up with the idea for it, I didn't write it for like 3 years because I was scared of just those things, like having to reveal myself in a way that I'd never revealed myself to anybody before, not even the people who, know and love me the best. But eventually I decided that it was sort of a story worth telling. And when I decided to do it, I've spent my career as a journalist writing about other people. And when I write about other people, often, if the story requires it, I've asked them really intimate questions about their lives, asked them to reveal very personal things, asked them to tell me about their worst moments. And so I thought, if I'm going to write about myself, I should hold myself to that standard. Write about myself in the way if I was another person, I guess, so to speak. If I was writing about that person, how would I do it? And what questions would I ask and what material would I use? The advantage I had, of course, in writing my own story is I knew all the material. And so I could more easily sort of pick and choose. But as I went through the story and thought about, I get to a point where I want to write about something in particular, like fast food, for example. And I'd say, so what are the stories I have about fast food? And I would kind of think about them and pick through them. And then I would tell the story that I thought illustrated the point I wanted to make the best, even if it didn't make me look good, because that's the standard I would hold if I was writing about somebody else. So basically, I treated myself the way I would treat somebody else if I was writing their story. And that led to, some places that are probably uncomfortable to read because they were uncomfortable for me to write.
So, one of the things that I felt that you did a really good job of, and maybe because it's personal to me, is your chapter on honesty. And I will tell you right now, there was nothing about this book that was difficult to read, and that's kind of where I was saying, if you had told me the conceit of the book, I'd be like, ooh, I don't know that I would have picked this book to read. But I picked it up based on having met you at Avid when you were here, and Allison Salerno, said that I had to read the book. So Allison, you don't disagree with her, at least openly. I just found it extremely well done, and more importantly, that chapter especially was almost therapeutic for me because I've lived that experience, and I think all of us have lived that experience in some facet of our lives or another. But you do such an effective job of capturing it, and it's rare that I get tears in my eyes at that. And I'll just let you know, man, that chapter really hit me, and I appreciate you opening yourself up that way. It's really impressive how well you do that.
Well, thank you, Tony. And I thought that was an important part of the book to write, because I had certainly lied to other people about what I was eating and how I was doing and all that sort of thing my whole life, to try to convince people that everything was fine when it was obvious it wasn't. But also, more than anyone, I lied to myself. The great lie, when you have any addiction or any sort of obsession in your life, the great lie is that you're going to start working on it tomorrow. Tomorrow is always this golden day where everything will be fine and you can start with a clean slate and all that sort of thing. And tomorrow never gets here. You wake up the next day and something happens or something goes wrong and you start the same bad habits all over again. And so, I lied to many, many people over all these years, but mostly to myself. And that chapter was a way to, I hope, sort of come to a reckoning with that.
I think you did a great job with it. So you don't need my validation. I just want to tell you that.
Well, it's nice. It's nice, though.
Yeah. One of the things I also know through the book, you did a great job of talking about your career. You start out in Augusta, in some of that time there, but then you become a sub-bureau chief for the Charlotte Observer. That, I can remember that newspaper in that particular time, particularly the late 80s, early 90s, just the powerhouse it was, not just in North Carolina, across the Southeast. Almost at that point, it had overtaken the AJC, maybe because of some of Charlotte's growth. But what was that like? Because you were at Rock Hill or somewhere like that?
Well, I started out, you're very kind in saying sub-bureau chief. I guess I was the bureau chief because I was the only one in there. But I started out in a small town called Lancaster, South Carolina, which is about 40 miles south of Charlotte. The Observer had a bureau in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is a bigger city. And this was a sub-bureau of that bureau. It was like a subatomic particle, basically. And so I was in that one-person office for a couple of years before I sort of worked my way up. And the Observer, you're right, it was a powerhouse. When I got here, they had just won the Pulitzer Prize for covering the Jim Baker and the PTL scandal. And there were people coming here from all over the country, really good reporters, editors, photographers. It was an incredible place to work and to learn and to sort of hone my skills and just learn from some really smart and gifted, talented, hardworking people.
And then you spent time there. What was your favorite story when you worked for the Observer?
Ooh, boy, I wrote a lot of stories. I wrote thousands because I was there 23 years.
Oh, wow.
And I guess the story that jumps out at me, if you ask me again tomorrow, I might mention something different. But I wrote a story, and in fact, I'm looking at the picture right now in my office. There was, back in 1957, a young woman named Dorothy Counts helped integrate the Charlotte schools. And that day, when school started that year, there were black kids who went to other schools in clumps of like 2 or 3 or 4 integrating the schools. But at Dorothy's school, she was the only black student. And there was where you park to get out to go to the school, there's a little rise. You walk down this kind of a hill to get to the schoolhouse. And that day she was yelled at and spat on and people threw stuff at her and all that sort of thing. And a photographer for the Observer, a guy named Don Sturkey, took several famous pictures that day, but one in particular that always haunted me, of her in the middle of this crowd of angry white kids yelling at her. And I used to see that picture. We'd run it in the paper every once in a while. I'd see it at museums and that sort of thing. And that picture always haunted me. And I finally realized that what haunted me about it is we had written a lot about Dorothy in the intervening years. I knew how she was doing. She had, had managed it, had gone on to have a really good, solid life and was helping out other kids. But I never knew what was going on in the heads of the white kids in that picture. And so I decided to write a story about that. And so in 2007, which was the 50th anniversary of that day, I went back and tracked down some of the white kids who were in that picture. And I interspersed their stories with Dorothy's story and found that at least some of those kids had felt tremendous guilt and shame over what they had done that day. And so, the story I wrote ended up kind of being about history and about how, what you do in the moment and how that can affect the rest of your life and all that sort of thing. And that's probably, of the 23 years I've spent at the Observer, that's probably the story that I feel the proudest of.
Yeah, that's, if I recall reading this correctly, that's also one of the stories that you submitted for your Neiman Fellowship.
I believe it was, yeah.
Yeah, I encourage you to go find that, guys, if you are at all interested. It's super well done, and it's impactful, especially even though we're dealing with COVID-19, we continue to reckon with roles in race relations in America. I do want to talk a little bit about your ESPN work and working with Will at Sports on Earth.
Sure.
I think most people, if they've read your work at ESPN, it's probably the Lorenzen story, the Jared Lorenzen story.
Yeah.
So interestingly about that story is you humanize him in a way that, he had always been a caricature, and probably the everlasting memory people have of him, if you just drive by a football fan, is him in the was it the either arena football, the Dragons, or whatever. But and of course he recently passed away, but he's such a down to earth guy, I guess is the right way of putting it. I had a chance to interact with him on Twitter several times, and Twitter's by no means nearly as personal as sitting down and talking with a dude, but it's just, you do a good job of humanizing him in making the story real. How did that story come about? Well,
the story is actually it's a large reason that I wrote this book. So I was right. I wrote for ESPN off and on for 3 or 4 years, from like 2013 to 2017 or so. And one night I was just watching SportsCenter, and at the end of SportsCenter, they often do a little like, here's something funny from the world of sports. And that night it was Jared. And Jared, he, who had played, for people who don't know it, played at Kentucky in the early, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s. Had actually played in the NFL for a couple of years as a backup for the Giants. But by
Dude
this
has
point,
a Super Bowl ring.
He does. He backed up Eli Manning one of the years they beat the Patriots. And so this time, by 2014, that was long ago. And he was playing for some indoor football league, still playing quarterback, and when he was at Kentucky in the NFL, he was known for being the biggest quarterback anybody had ever seen. He played at usually around 300 pounds. People called him the hefty lefty or the Pillsbury throw boy. By this point in this indoor league, he was clearly 400 pounds or more, but still playing quarterback and still really good. So I saw that little highlight and I thought, man, somebody ought to write about that guy. And maybe I'm the one to do it because I'm a fellow big guy. So I tracked him down the next day and asked him if I could come see him. And he said yes. And so I went to Lexington, Kentucky, where he was living. And, we just hit it off right away because we shared so much. We had so much in common about our clothes and our food and the way we were brought up and all the mixed messages we got about food. Jared always, no matter what league he played in, some coach would always make him make a certain weight. And I remember he was telling me about one, I think it was like a peewee league or something, where he just, worked his butt off to make the weight. And when he made it, the coach said, congratulations, and gave him a plate of brownies, and so he got all these mixed messages about food and what it meant to him. And he had, a really successful career as an elite athlete, but he had this other side of himself as a fat guy that he could not shake and was affecting his life in a lot of negative ways. And that's exactly how I felt about myself. And so as I wrote his story and learned how to write the hard truth about him, but still with some compassion and empathy, I could sort of see a way toward writing my story. And so as I finished writing Jared's story, I went to my book agent. And, he's the one, my book agent had suggested me write about a memoir about all this stuff like 3 years before, and I put it off. But I decided then was the right time to do it. And so, so Jared's story came out. It did really well. I believe that it was the most read story on ESPN's website that year. And then that directly led to my book.
Yeah. Well, it's very well done. And I think you really capture, Jared Lorenzen, the not football player, and how just he, especially in later times as he struggled with his weight, embraced some of that. So it's fantastic. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. And I was just going to say, as you sort of mentioned, Jared passed away last year. He's 38, and he just never was quite able to get a hold of his weight, and it just caused worse and worse problems. And it was, we had kept in touch. We weren't great friends, but we had kept in touch and sort of rooted for each other. And it was just a terrible loss. And he's beloved in Kentucky, especially, and a huge loss for those folks up there, especially.
Yeah, and every time I had interactions with him, he just seemed like a genuine, decent person. And in a lot of ways, it's weird. I'm not particularly athletic. I played some in high school, and continued to play throughout my 30s until my body's like, this isn't for you anymore.
Right.
Almost in a lot of ways, he was the everyman big guy who went and did something different, and just like it makes me think of like Charles Barkley and a lot of, I don't know. It's just it's personal. It was personal. It hit me hard when he passed away.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to the book for a second, because I definitely want to talk about Willie's Weenie Wagon, and I don't want to hide the lead there. And I want to let you talk about Willie's Weenie Wagon. You're not like Adam Driver, right? Can I read a short part from the book?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. This is in chapter 4 called "Grease is the Word." It just spectacularly captures not just Willie's Weenie Wagon, but something I'd never really considered but deeply felt. It's everybody needs a third place, a bar or a coffee shop or a bookstore, somewhere to feel comfortable that's not work or home. Willie's was my third place for a lot of years. I went there to meet old friends. I went after getting in trouble with my folks. I took dates there at the end of the night when our clothes were tasseled and our appetites high. I slunk back there after getting dumped. I went when I didn't know what else to do. I'd sit on the hood of my car, and somebody I knew would eventually show up. Man, that is it's nearly poetic, because I think all of us can think of a place like that. And it's interesting how, for so many of us, that place was food. It's not hard for me, who knows Willie's Weenie Wagon, to understand why that place is for you. But just tell us about Willie's Weenie Wagon, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I grew up in South Georgia on the coast, Brunswick, Georgia. And in Brunswick, Willie's is this kind of legendary hot dog place. And it has became, certainly for me and for lots of other people, sort of like the social center of town. That's where you go when you don't know where else to go. And if you sit there long enough, somebody will show up. And that became sort of, during, I guess, the years that I was able to drive, starting when I was 16, became kind of a big hangout for me and my friends. And so, we didn't even have to let each other know we were going there. We would just go there. It's like the bat signal, would go up, and we'd all just sort of gather at Willie's. And I would always sort of circle back around there at some point when I was out and about, just to see who else was there. And plus, they had these incredible hot dogs, which I just devoured. I've probably eaten 1,000 Willie's hot dogs in my life. And so it was this really great food, too, but it was also a gathering spot. And like I said, in the thing you just read, most people have a coffee shop or a bar or a bookstore somewhere where they just kind of go to decompress from the day, or just go where they want to meet friends, or just somewhere they feel comfortable that's not home or work. And that was the third place for certainly my high school years. And then even after I went away, when I would come back home to visit family, at some point I'd always stop by there just to see what it looked like and all that sort of thing. And they're still around. And when I go down there, when I go down there, I still stop by. And it's just a very comforting place for me, I guess is the way I would put it.
Yeah, it's still there. I don't know if you've been down there recently. I was there at Christmas, and it's still kind of there.
I was there. I was there in October.
Yeah,
and it just feels so good to drive by and see that yellow building and the lights on.
I mean, it's right there. It's on. If you get to Brunswick, it's on Altama, across from College Coastal Georgia. I think between like Washington and 6th or Washington and 5th.
I forget. It's easy to find.
Yeah, it's not hard to find. One last thing, having had the opportunity to go out and do, what makes you feel tied back to home, whether that be Glenn County or Brantley County or Athens for that matter?
Well, in Athens, I have so many good memories there. And I do like to sort of go look at the touchstones of my time there. So, for example, our senior year, there were 5 of us who lived in an old house on Oconee Street, and just up from what used to be O'Malley's. And every time I go back, I'll drive by that house to see, one, is it still there? And 2, does it look good? And are people living there? Does it look like a happy place? And that sort of thing. I'll always go, check out Wuxtree Records and the 40 Watt. And usually when I meet friends there, we will meet at the Grill, because the Grill was somewhere that was around. And of course, we'll always go walk on old campus. The Student Center, I'm old enough, the Student Center was actually built when I was a student there. They finished it like my junior year, I think. And so I always go to the Student Center and walk around, and of course go to Sanford Stadium, go out on the bridge there and look around there. And so there's so many of those places that hold fond memories for me, and just kind of going back and feeling that something in the air is really important. When I go home to where I grew up, the big thing for me is to see the ocean. So, I grew up on St. Simons, Brunswick, down the coast, and I'll always make sure if I'm down there that I go somewhere where I can smell the salt water and feel the wind in my face, because I really miss that, because in Charlotte we don't really have that sort of thing, and so that's something that is a real touchstone to me.
Well, Tommy, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. It has been an honor and a pleasure. If you don't mind, tell everybody where they can find your work. I never even got to talk about the Southbound podcast, which I feel bad about.
It's okay. I'll do it now.
One of my favorites, man.
Yeah, good. Well, I do a podcast called Southbound for WFAE, the NPR station in Charlotte. It's just conversations with interesting Southerners. So it's people in music, food, fashion, writing, a little bit of everything. And that you can find at WFAE.org. All the episodes are archived there. I also have a website that's TommyTomlinson.com. That's where you can find archives of some of my older stories. That story we mentioned about Dorothy Counts is in there. The story I wrote about Jared is there. All that sort of thing. And I'm at Tommy Tomlinson on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to keep up with what I'm doing at the moment. I will always post anything I write to my Twitter feed, so you can find it there.
Tommy, I really appreciate you taking the time. Go Dogs.
Tony, go Dogs, man. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure. Hey, one of the things that it just occurred to me, you keep talking about David Duclos. Any chance Michael Duclos is his brother?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Michael and I were pretty good friends in law school. When I saw that name, I was
really?
like, man, why do I know that name? And I'd done a little, I went and looked at Mike's Facebook page, and I saw David Duclos in there. He's in Indianapolis now, right? Don't remember that from the book?
Yeah, David also went to law school, and so he was like, I guess he started in '86.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Michael's his younger brother.
And that's what made me think that is. I knew Michael had because he always had outlines. And I knew he had an older brother that was a lawyer and had been at Georgia. So
yeah, and their parents moved to Athens at some point and lived there for a long time. In fact, they lived just down the street from Larry Munson for a while, and then their dad passed away, I guess last year or year before last, and their mom moved to a retirement home down in Lake Oconee. But yeah, David and Michael are great guys, and just super great people there. I think he grew up in Albany.
In Albany,
yeah. And all the guys I hung out with in college, I was this core group. They were all from Albany. They all went to high school together and stuff like that. And that our group still gets together usually every summer. We go to Athens and hang out for a weekend and stuff.
Well, it's I got to tell you, reading especially the first couple of chapters, the dinner on the grounds and just all the stuff. I remember the Pizza Hut, the Pizza Inn in Brunswick, and I remember it. Just all those things were just such evocative memories for me.
Good. I'm so glad.
Yeah, but I really appreciate it. And you ever find yourself, you and Alice decide y'all want to come to a football game, please let us know. You always have a tailgate spot with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm currently trying to make any connections I have to get tickets. Georgia and Clemson are playing here next year.
I probably should have brought that up since we're nominally a sports podcast, although we don't shit to talk about right now.
Yeah, we talked about play, but yeah, I've got. I'm going to start working my connections here and see, because all my friends want to come, so I got to figure out how to get some tickets to that. But I mean, I live like 2 miles from that stadium. I can almost walk.
Far. Yeah, I have a good friend that lives in that neighborhood. A good friend from high school. We've kept in touch online, but I haven't seen him probably in 15 years. And he lives out on that east of at the Plaza area.
Oh, great!
So
yeah, good.
He and his.
Well, if you ever come this way, give us a holler.
Same here, man. I really appreciate it. And Scott will get this. He's less busy, so he'll get this thing put out pretty quickly. He may be in touch for some of these links. I tried to jot them down, and we usually put them in the show notes. But I really appreciate what you do. And if I can do anything else, let me know.
Yeah, just let me know when it comes out, and I'll be glad to spread the word.
Appreciate it, Tommy. Good talk with you.
See you, Tommy.
All right, bye. Many thanks to Tommy Tomlinson for joining me. You can find The Elephant in the Room at all bookstores, whether online or in person, assuming, of course, you can find an in-person bookstore right now. It was a joy and honor to get to spend a few minutes talking with him during these interesting times. Keep an eye out for other podcasts and opportunities to chat with us, whether that be via Zoom so we can post to our YouTube channel, and you should subscribe to that, or otherwise. Scott, Will, and I will be back with a regular podcast to talk about who knows what very soon. Go Dogs.